Hello, everyone, and welcome to Raquel Teaches Web Development. My name is Raquel, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to create tables using HTML. All right, so before I show you how to actually code it, I want to first give you an idea of what we're going to create so you can see what it's going to look like. So let me switch over here to LibreOffice. Okay, so if you've ever used any kind of word processing program or even like a spreadsheet, you should know what a table is. And so a table is a way to present information in a grid type format. And so the grid has columns and rows like you see here, right? So most tables, after they're formatted, will have the first row designated as like a header row, and that might have bold text in it, colors, whatever. But then the rest of the table has text that is formatted plainly and it's organized in some kind of way. So we can recreate this look with HTML to present data in that format. Now, one thing to keep in mind when it comes to creating tables in HTML is that it's a little bit different than the way you would create it in something like, say, a word processing program like the LibreOffice right here. So, and let me just switch there for a second. So in LibreOffice, if you were to create a table, you just go up to like the table menu button and you select, how many rows or columns you need, and it'll insert that for you. That's not the way it works in HTML. So in HTML, what we have to do is we have to decide ahead of time, meaning in our planning phase, how many columns and rows we need. And in HTML, the number of columns that your table has is determined by the number of cells that you actually determine in each row. And so you're going to see how that works. Okay, but just keep that in mind that the number of columns is actually determined by the number of cells in each row. All right, so let me go ahead and switch to, well, that's the browser. Okay, so we're starting with a blank page. Let me go ahead and switch to the code editor. So the code for this is going to be on my blog. And so if you're starting out by watching the playlist on my channel, you probably have not looked at the CSS playlist yet. One, because it doesn't exist yet, but number two, because CSS is something you learn after HTML. So when it comes to tables, there is some CSS that's here because it's going to help you to be able to see it better on the page as you're learning to practice it and get to know the elements and how they work. And so in this example, I am including a very minimal amount of CSS here, and that's going to help for the table to be actually viewed, because when you code tables, they don't naturally come with an outline the way they do in word processing programs, for example. So we have to add that in HTML. So there is a minimal amount of CSS here. This code will be available on my blog. And then what you can do is you can continue to experiment as you practice learning how to make tables. And then when you get to the CSS playlist, you'll see that there's a lot of CSS code available to help us style tables to look how we want. Okay, but just for now, just take my word for it that this is the minimum CSS that you need. And without it, you're probably not going to have any idea what's going on when you're creating tables. All right, so let's hop right into it. So let me go ahead and switch back over to the code editor here. So the markup, the elements that you use to create a table always go within the body element of your web page. Okay, and so tables are made up of four main components. They're made up of the table elements, the table row element, and then the table header and the table data element. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and set up a table that has 2 columns and 2 rows, and you're going to see how that all looks like. Now keep in mind that tables can be tedious, so I always recommend that you go ahead and just take a piece of paper and at least draw out what you want your table to look like before you start coding it. Because if you don't, and you need to start making changes and switching things around, adding columns or deleting rows and stuff, you're going to be giving yourself a lot of extra work, a lot of extra unnecessary work. Okay, so let's go ahead. So the first thing you want to do, and also keep in mind that these elements are always going to be nested inside of each other. So the first thing you're going to do is create the table itself, and you do that using the table element like so. And I always like to say add your opening and closing elements. So that just sets up the table. And now we can start adding table rows, right? And then within each row, we can add a table cell that will be the data. So just momentarily, let me just switch back over here to the sample again. So in this example, let me switch here. You know, and when we're creating an HTML, we're creating a whole row at a time. Hopefully you guys can see that highlighted. Or in the first example, if you see this first row that's highlighted in gray, that's how we create HTML tables, one row at a time. So we actually have to write the code that makes the row exist, and then we have to write code for each one of these table cells. So in this example, we'd be creating a table cell for first name, one for last name, etc. So actually in this example, I'm going to make it to imitate this sample table here, right? So let's go. Let's make this happen, Captain. So let me switch back over to the code editor. So I've gone ahead and set up the table first. And now I'm going to create a row. So for our example, we're going to need 3 rows. So in my experience, I like to create all my rows at first. As you work with tables, you may have a different workflow, but this is what I like to do. So I'm going to go ahead and create 3 rows first, and then I'm going to fill those in with whatever I need. So rows are created with the TR tag, right? And I actually like to stack them on top of each other like that. So I'm just going to copy and paste them. So that's the first row. And since I need 3 rows, I'm just going to paste this 2 more times. All right. So right now I have 3 rows, a table element set up, and then 3 sets of an opening and closing tag for a table row. And so now I can start adding the cells that go within them. So just quickly back to the sample, right? So now I'm going to be creating these cells here and this cell here and this cell. So since I'm going in the first row, I'm creating the entire first row, right? I have to create 3 cells. Okay. And so this row, the first row is going to have 3 cells. The next one's going to have 3 cells, and the next one, and the next one is going to have 3 cells. Okay. So keeping that in mind, let's go back here to the code editor. So, and again, these are nested, right? So let me switch back. These are nested. So to create a table cell, we're going to use the TD tag, and that stands for table data. And so these also have an opening and closing tag. So I'm going to start with TD and a closing TD tag. Now, these I tend to keep on the same line. All right. And so since I need 3 of these, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this 2 more times. See, copying and pasting is good with web development. You save yourself time. Right. And so now that I have 3 table cells created, I can now go ahead and fill that in. And actually, let me back up because this should be the table header. So with HTML tables, there are 2 ways to display the content within the table row. You can have a table header, which gives that emphasis of that first row of table cells, the way we saw in the sample. And then you have table data, TD, which is just to display data that does not have emphasis. So actually for this one, since I do want to imitate the one I just showed you in the sample, I'm going to go ahead and use the table header element for the first row, and then I'll be using the table data element for the remaining rows. Okay, so the table header element is just simply a TH. All right, and again, that also has a closing tag. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that 2 more times, right? Because I wanted to create 3 columns. So I'm just going to paste and paste. And so within these tags, I can now start to enter the information I want to appear in the table. So I'm going to go ahead and put first name. I'm going to put last name. I'm going to put favorite snack, right? So let's now go ahead and switch to the web browser so you can see what that looks like. And I'm going to have to refresh the page. So let's refresh here. Okay, great. And so, let me see if I can. Crap, I still have not remembered how to zoom that in. Okay, so right here, I've zoomed this in a little bit. So right here, you can see that so far it's working the way it's supposed to, right? There is a row, the first row of the table. There's a border around it, and it has 3 cells in there. Okay, so now we can proceed to fill in the rest of the information for the remaining rows of the table. So when I switch back to the code editor, what I can do is just go here now to the second table row, and now I can use the TD element to display that data that does not have an emphasis Or in other words, it's not going to be like the head of the column. So I'm going to use the TD element to create that cell. That also has a closing tag. And I can do the same here where I can just copy and paste that set of tags. Save myself some time. And now I'm going to fill in the information here. So keep in mind that the information is being filled in row by row, right? So I'm going to be putting in the second row of information as seen as a sample. So it's Forrest Gump, and we all know he loved Dr. Peppers. And if you don't know who Forrest Gump is, go watch the movie Forrest Gump. I guarantee that you will love it. All right, because I loved it and it's awesome. So here we go. So in the code editor, I'm going to put in the first cell of the second row, I'm going to put the first name that was there, Forrest Gump. Okay, and we're going to put Dr. Pepper because that was his favorite thing. So now if we go back and refresh the browser, we should now see a second row of data that is not bolded, and it should line up with the first row. So let's see what that looks like. Boom. See? Easy peasy. So I'm going to go ahead and add that last row of data so we can finish off this table. So creating tables is actually pretty easy. So in this example, I'm just going to go ahead and copy these table data elements again, and I'm going to replace the data that's within the tags with the data for the third row. Now, this is not always recommended because, you know, when you're copying and pasting data, if you don't remember to replace everything, that could be causing problems when you're formatting stuff or just making sure stuff is correct. So depending on what you're working on, you may or may not want to adopt that as a habit. So the first name for this last line in the table is Randy Macho Man and Savage. And again, if you don't know who that is, Google him. You will love him. And you'll know why Slim Jim was his favorite. But it'd been my favorite too, I guess. Even though Slim Jims are pretty awesome, but whatever. All right, so, oh wait, I don't think I saved my changes. Oops. Oh, I did. Okay, so now I'm going to switch back to the browser. We're going to refresh it. And sure enough, the third row of information has been added. Now, one of the things you will notice, and this is something that I'll get into when I create the CSS playlist and I go over the CSS tags styling rules available for tables, is that you'll notice that tables are an inline element, meaning that they only get big enough to display the information that they contain. And so you see that since the text for Randy Macho Man is bigger than Forrest, it stretched the size of that first column to fit all that table data in there. All right. Whereas the other ones were made the same because nothing got stretched out. It's as wide as the widest thing in the table. So you'll notice that in the first column, the widest thing is Randy Macho Man. And then in the next two columns, the widest thing is actually the heading. Okay. So that's all there is to creating a table. It's using the table element, using the table row element, table header when you want to have a header for the columns, and then using table data to display data that does not need to be emphasized. So again, I'm going to have all the code for this on my blog. Okay, and this is just part one of creating tables. And so in the next part of this creating table series, I'm going to go over how you can use code to manipulate how these rows and columns look, meaning that we'll be able to merge them to create a look that looks like it's one long column instead of just a cell, or one long row. Okay, but that's it for now. These are the basics of how to set up and create a table using HTML. Go ahead and visit my blog to get the sample code for this. If you have any questions about this, feel free to post on the blog and I will be answering them. Otherwise, I hope that you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please go ahead and hit the like button on here. And if you know anyone that would find this helpful, go ahead and use the share button to share it with them. And if you'd like to be notified of future videos as they get added to the channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. It's free. So thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this video. Enjoy the rest of your day, and God bless.